Good evening, everybody. Let's see. We good? Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Wednesday night service for the North Jackson Church of Christ. We're so glad that you're able to make it this evening. Visitors, we're so glad that you're here. If you would, so that we have a record of your attendance, would you please fill out one of the blue attendance cards on the pew ahead of you? And members, if you would, get the white one or just fill it out in the Lightpost app. Tonight we're going to start off with number 829, and if you'd like to mark the invitation song, it's going to be number 517. 517 will be the invitation. Right now we'll be singing number 829. I'm satisfied with just a cottage below, a little silver and a little gold, but in that city where the ransom will shine, I want a gold one, that silver line. I've got a mansion just over the hilltop, in that bright land where we'll never grow old. And someday yonder we will never more wander, but walk the streets that are purest gold. Though often tempted, tormented and tested, and like the prophet, my pillow a stone. And though I find here no permanent dwelling, I know he'll give me a mansion my own. I've got a mansion just over the hilltop, in that bright land where we'll never grow old. And someday yonder we will never more wander, but walk the streets that are purest gold. Don't think me poor or deserted or lonely, I'm not discouraged, I'm heaven bound. I'm just a pilgrim in search of a city. I want a mansion, a robe and a crown. I've got a mansion just over the hilltop, in that bright land where we'll never grow old. And someday yonder we will never more wander, but walk the streets that are purest gold.
Good evening, everyone. Someone once said, it's not the difficult passages that give me the most problems in life. It's the passages that I do understand that challenge me to try to make the changes in my life. And one of those simple passages that's easy to understand but really difficult at times to keep is found in Matthew 16:24, where Jesus says, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. If we're really totally honest with ourselves, I'm afraid that most of us would have to admit that we haven't really quite conquered or haven't really quite mastered that simple demand on our lives. The late B.C. Goodpasture makes the following comment on this verse. He says, of all the precepts relative to self, this is one of the most difficult to obey. A man doesn't deny himself when he merely gives that which he does not need or miss. A man does not deny himself when he refrains from doing that which he really does not care to do. One denies himself when he, like the poor widow, gives that which he needs and will miss. A man denies himself when he, like Moses, turns his back upon that which he likes to do and that which he finds pleasurable and profitable in the doing. He says, as crisp and clear as a gunshot on a still day, the words of the greatest of all teachers fall upon the ear. If any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. You see, the truth is that it seems that just about the time that you think that you've got things figured out and you think you've got things mastered in your life and your life is under control, then that old man of self lifts his head and you find yourself challenged to master those emotions, to control those trials and those temptations. And it seems to me that biblically speaking, there are basically four principles that that basically we can gain from the idea of oneself. And first of all, we need to know ourselves, or know yourself. In other words, know your weaknesses, know your strengths, know the good, know the bad about yourself. Because when you know your weaknesses, you're in a lot better position to conquer them. And when you know your strengths, it'll help you to live life with courage and determination. So know yourself. But secondly, also, you must value yourself. That is that we're created in the image of God. And so instead of having self-pity and that woe is me attitude, we should have the kind of attitude of the kind of joy that God truly wants us to have. So we need to value ourselves as people who are made in the image of God. And third, deny yourself. Learn that little two-letter word, no. Learn to say no, not only to others at times, but even no to yourself. As much as that inside voice would try to convince you, you deserve it. You go ahead and you just do that because you deserve it. Well, there comes a point in the mad rush of things in life and fulfillment that the child of God has to step out of that race of life, that race that is full of temptations and trials, and to do those things that denies self but says right and good to God. But finally, we must consecrate ourselves. And that's something that our society knows really nothing about. Being consecrated, setting oneself apart for God's use. Give yourself to a higher purpose than self. And of course, the ultimate consecration is dedication, commitment to God and to His will in your life. And so this is the battle that we have. The battle is not some frightening, scary creature outside of the world. It's not something that's often trying to come upon us, but it's that which we find many times within as Satan tempts us. We've been given the armor to fight with, and the one great enemy that we face is truly ourselves. And once we have slain self, then God will be exalted in our lives, and the outcome will be eternity in heaven with God. And so tonight, are you still living for self? Are you still hanging on to self? Jesus said, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Maybe tonight you need to obey the gospel. Maybe tonight you need the prayers of the church. But whatever that might be, if we can assist you and help you in any way, we encourage you to come while we stand and while we sing.
Oh, do not let the word depart, and close thine eyes against the light. Poor sinner, harden not thy heart. Be saved, oh, tonight. Oh, why not tonight, not tonight? Oh, why not tonight? Wilt thou be saved? Then why not tonight? Tomorrow's sun may never rise to bless thy long deluded sight. This is the time, oh then be wise, be saved, oh tonight. Oh, why not tonight? Oh, why not tonight? Wilt thou be saved? Then why not tonight? Our blessed Please be seated.
Thank you, Hal. Good evening. Welcome to the midweek Bible study here at the North Jackson Church of Christ. Again, if you're visiting with us, we want to count you as an honored guest and invite you back each and every opportunity that you have. As Tommy mentioned, if you'll fill out one of the blue cards, our ushers are going to come down and collect those now. Members, if you fill out the Light Post app or one of the white cards, they'll collect those as well. We offer our love and deepest sympathy to Roy and Miranda Adair and all the family in the death of Roy's mother, Geneva Adair, on Sunday, December the 1st. She was also the grandmother of Casey and Blake Adair. Funeral services were held yesterday in Tupelo, Mississippi. As far as church events go, please see the church bulletin or the bulletin board in the foyer for information regarding the Lads to Leaders programs that will be meeting this Sunday, December 8th, as well as any youth or church activities. The seasoned seniors will be eating lunch in the fellowship hall following morning services this Sunday, December the 8th. Please sign up by tonight if you plan to attend. Group 4 will be the group hosting this meal. And for tonight's Bible classes, the ladies' Wednesday night Bible class will meet in the fellowship hall tonight to sign holiday cards for our shut-ins. After Bible class, the cards will be placed in the auditorium lobby. Please place your cards in the bags by Wednesday, December the 11th. And since the ladies will be in the fellowship hall, Daniel Rogers' class is going to be taking over the ladies' classroom tonight. So if you attend Daniel's class, make sure to notice that teaching arrangement. If there are no other announcements, we will be led in a closing prayer by Randy Rice and then a dismissal song by Tommy Jones. Would you please be standing with me?
Let us pray. Our most loving Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for allowing us to be here tonight to sing songs of praise to you, to focus on your will in our lives. And Father, as Hal pointed out, that each day we have to make a decision, and that decision is whether to follow you or follow the world and Satan. We pray that each day we will make the choice to follow you. Father, we pray that as we go to our Bible classes tonight, that you would help us to have open minds and open hearts, that we will be attentive to what the teachers have to say. We thank you so much for the ability of the teachers that we do have, and we pray that you will bless them and their continued growth as they study your word. Father, we thank you for our elders, for our deacons, for our missionaries, for many people who do so many things that behind the scenes we don't even know about. And we just pray, Father, that as a congregation you will help us grow in our love for each other and for you. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Before we head to our classes, let's sing the first and the last verse of number 48, Anywhere with Jesus. Anywhere with Jesus I can safely go, anywhere he leads me in this world below. Anywhere without him dearest joys would fade. Anywhere with Jesus I am not afraid. Anywhere, anywhere, fear I cannot know. Anywhere with Jesus I can safely go. Anywhere with Jesus I can go to sleep. When the darkening shadows round about me creep, knowing I shall waken nevermore to roam. Anywhere with Jesus will be home, sweet home. Anywhere, anywhere, fear I cannot know. Anywhere with Jesus I can safely go. You are dismissed to your classes.
Okay, everybody ready to go? Nice to see everybody. Our goal is to finish our discussion of the resurrection by the end of the year, if not before. So we will do that, and that will conclude our list of special topics we were going to consider, which was basically to discuss, we've really done 3 broad topics since we started this class, which began back in the other classroom before we shifted into in here. But we began by talking about alleged inconsistencies in the biblical portrait of God. We responded to objections to the description of God. There are those who say that the God of the Bible can't exist because the Bible description of God is incoherent, that it contradicts itself. So we responded to that, and then we proved the existence of God. And we did so by giving several arguments, and that took a while to flesh those out, but we worked through that. And then the third topic we've considered is the evidence for the resurrection of Christ. And we'll try to finish that up, and then after we do that, I think I'm still going to be in here, so my plan is to move to a text course, a Bible course, that is specifically dealing with a text, but I haven't decided which one yet. So if you have a strong feeling about that, then you can let me know, but I haven't decided what text to use yet. If I make a tentative decision, I'll let you know. All right, number 1, ready for our quiz? Name at least 2 of the naturalistic hypotheses that have been proposed as explanations for the historical facts concerning the resurrection of Jesus. What are at least 2? Someone tell me one, and then another person can tell me another. Good. Okay, the conspiracy theory. And what was that? Very good. The disciples stole the body, and so they conspired to promote this idea of the resurrection. Good. Okay. What else? Another one. All right, the swoon theory, also called the apparent death theory. And what is that?
These 2 ladies spoke up. I just relayed their...
Oh. Did they wake you up from a swoon in order to get you to... Okay. Well, what does someone want to tell us? What is the swoon theory or the apparent death theory? Right, that there's no resurrection because there was no death. Okay, very good. Anybody want to remember? That's very good, but anybody want to remember any others? We're on our last one, which is the, well, what is it? I'll just ask that. What is the one we're still talking about that we'll continue to talk about tonight? We're finishing up the what? Yeah, the legendary hypothesis. And that is that all of this about Jesus was just made up as a legend gradually over time. So there's a core of historical facts, but the historical facts did not include any what? What's the big thing? The core of what really happened, the history. There was a man named Jesus, but he didn't do any what? Right, miracles. He didn't do any miracles. And all of that is made up as a legend over time. Good. Okay, number 2, Roman historians, true or false? Do Roman historians take the general accuracy of Luke's writings for granted? Just talking about Roman historians of the Roman period, which is the period in which Jesus lived. Yeah, they take him for granted. They know that he's a good historian. So that's true. Always remember that Luke is one of the most respected historians of antiquity. And it's not to say that the other gospel writers are disrespected. It's just that Luke provides so many details that anchor his history to already known historical facts. That's why Luke is so highly regarded as a historian. Okay, number 3. A.N. Sherwin White, who was a Roman historian, showed that it takes at least how long for a legendary account to begin to replace a core of known historical facts. So when we say replace, what we mean is that people stop believing the true history and start believing the legend, to replace the true history? How long, at least how long does that take? Right, 2 generations, which is too long, remember? Because the Gospels were written prior to that amount of time elapsing. Very good. Number 4, one of the criteria of authenticity for an ancient document is the criterion of embarrassment. What does this criterion mean? Now remember, the criteria of authenticity are those earmarks that a statement about Jesus or a saying that Jesus made or a description of something the apostles did or believed, these are criteria that increase. They serve to increase the likelihood that they are true history. And we gave a number of those criteria, and one of them was the criterion of embarrassment. What is that? That's an example of it, but what is the criterion of embarrassment? What about this, an embarrassing detail makes it more likely to be historical? You're onto it, but that's right. It would be highly unlikely for you to invent it if it's an embarrassing detail, because it would serve to discredit what you're saying rather than to make it seem more impressive. And we gave the example of Jesus being crucified. And that's one of the reasons why the crucifixion of Jesus is taken to be the most concretely accepted, true, verified historical fact about him. Everybody who is a legitimate historian agrees that Jesus was crucified. Another thing would be all of the embarrassing details about the apostles. Can anybody think of anything that is embarrassing mentioned about the apostles? It doesn't mean that they weren't truly desiring to follow Jesus or they weren't good men, but the Bible includes some things about the apostles that aren't too flattering. Such as what? Yeah, why would you make Peter's denial up? Yeah. Absolutely. That's right. It is embarrassing that a woman would be the initial witness to the empty tomb. And by the way, that criteria of authenticity is one of the reasons why the empty tomb narrative is so well accepted. We talked about that when we proved that as a historical fact, that the tomb was found empty by a group of his women followers. And that is one of the many reasons why historians widely accept that Jesus' tomb was found empty. That even if they don't believe in the resurrection, they believe his tomb was found empty, because it was women who discovered the tomb. And their testimony was unfortunately considered to be what? Considered to be unreliable, inadmissible in court because they were thought to be too emotional. Okay, good. Well, we could spend a whole lot of time on that, but we'll pass on to number 5. Which is false? Let's just go step by step and you tell me if it's true or false. A, the New Testament documents are not parallel to existing pagan legends. Is that true? That is true. Okay, B, the New Testament documents were written too early to be the product of legendary accumulation. Is that true? Yes. C, the New Testament documents avoid challenging their readers to verify miracle claims. Okay, everybody got it. Everybody who spoke up got it. And that it is false. And we gave a number of examples where a speaker like Peter or a writer like Paul or Luke would challenge the readers in that day to go and verify it, because there were people who were still living who could tell what happened. Okay, now what about D? Obviously it's going to be true because we've already found the false one, but D, the New Testament documents meet the criteria of authenticity, and we said that before. Okay, here's the argument we're considering in our class. And we won't read the whole thing again, but I just remind you, this whole big block of our class that's been going on for ever since we moved in here, has been discussing the evidence for this argument. So we're trying to prove this argument to be true. And the conclusion of the argument is, it is rational to believe that God raised Jesus from the dead. And we're on this third part here where we're evaluating naturalistic explanations of the four facts. You remember that? And we have evaluated 5 of them so far: wrong tomb theory, hallucination theory, displaced body theory, conspiracy, and swoon theory. And now we're in the legendary theory. And these are the 6 criteria whereby a historical explanation would be evaluated as being the best. So it's not arbitrary. It's not like we say we would like for the resurrection to be true, so therefore it's the best explanation. No, we give criteria that's our standard criteria for evaluating any historical explanation, whether it has anything to do with the Bible or not. Just criteria to establish that anything happened in history, and these are the criteria which we talked about before. And this legendary hypothesis I described a minute ago about how Christians invented the miraculous aspects of Jesus' life over the centuries. And we have made 4 out of the 5 points about the critique of the legendary hypothesis. We've said the New Testament documents are not parallel to pagan legends. They're written too early to be legendary accumulations. They meet the criteria of authenticity. They challenge their readers to verify miracle claims. And now, tonight, we're going to do the 5th one, and maybe even beyond that. We're going to say that the New Testament documents contain narratives that are too detailed to be ancient myths. And when we say too detailed, we mean that ancient mythology tells broad, sweeping narratives about heroic things that heroes did, but they don't give nitty-gritty detail about the events. That comes in modern fiction. If you go and read a modern novel, you will find that there are all kinds of little details that are included to give the sense of realism. How did the sidewalk feel under his shoes? Or what color exactly were the leaves that were floating down through the air? You know, these details that make you feel like you're there. Well, ancient mythology doesn't include that. It tells you the bare bones of what happened. But modern fiction, we're talking about literature from like the 19th and 20th centuries. That's the type of literature that gives you that nitty-gritty detail. The problem is the New Testament authors give you an extreme amount of detail that is much more than ancient literature did. So the problem, if you want to say that it's an invention, that it's not historical documentation, is that it's a type of literature that would not have been amenable. It wouldn't have been ready at hand for the gospel writers to use. They would tend to make up things like Homer's Iliad or the Odyssey or other mythology from that period, and not the type of historical fiction that they wrote. Let me give you an example. I'm going to give you a statement from C.S. Lewis, who was a scholar of mythology. That was his specialty at Oxford University. And he wrote, "I have been reading poems, romances, vision literature, legends, and myths all my life. I know what they are like. I know none of them are like this," that is the Gospels. None of them are like the Gospels. Of this gospel text, there are only 2 possible views. Either this is historical reportage, or else some unknown ancient writer without known predecessors or successors suddenly anticipated the whole technique of modern novelistic realistic narrative. The reader who doesn't see this has simply not learned how to read. Hasn't learned how to read ancient fiction or modern fiction. And what he's saying is this historical reportage is too detailed to be an adaptation of ancient mythology. So this is just another reason to disprove the legendary hypothesis. It's just further evidence, is that it doesn't fit with any literary genre that people in the first century could have been expected to use if they're making up a legend. Does that make sense? That it was foreign to them, this style of writing that the Gospels have. Okay? Any question or comment about that? We're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I think this is another powerful nail in the coffin of the legendary hypothesis. Okay, very good. So now let's evaluate it based on everything we've said. We're here at the end of discussing the legendary hypothesis. What about its scope? Well, it has good explanatory scope. It at least tries to account for all of the four facts. In explanatory power, it really struggles because it can't explain the source for the legend or how it developed quickly enough to be included in the Gospels. And it also doesn't explain why the disciples were willing to die for their belief in what to them was a legend. If you're going along with the theory, you have to say that the disciples are making it up. So it suffers the same problem that the conspiracy theory had, which is that the disciples clearly were sincere. They were sincere to the point that they would suffer torturous deaths in order to defend what they were saying. They weren't just making up a story. What about plausibility? Well, it shares all the implausibilities of the conspiracy theory with the added implausibility that the gospel writers invented the genre of modern narrative fiction out of whole cloth. So in this sense, it's even worse than the conspiracy theory because you still have a conspiracy, you just have it developing in a way that is implausible, even more because it involves a whole new genre of literature that just instantly would have been invented if it is fiction. Now, if it's historical reportage, like we believe it is, you remember C.S. Lewis said there are two possibilities. It's either history, it's a report of history, or it's a whole new kind of fiction that nobody had ever written before. So, if it's true history, you can understand why they would write down a lot of details because they saw it. But it's not mythology. Okay, and is it less ad hoc than the other theories? Well, it shares many of the ad hoc claims of the conspiracy theory, which ascribes to the disciples motives and actions for which there's no evidence. Is it disconfirmed by fewer accepted beliefs than are the other theories? Well, the theory is disconfirmed by the known way in which legends develop, as we saw, by the early date of the Gospels, by the original disciples' obvious sincerity. So it's disconfirmed by a bunch of accepted beliefs. And does it exceed rival hypotheses in areas 1 to 5 that we've just shown? Well, the legendary theory enjoys some popular support, but scholarship has pretty much rejected it. There are a few who will defend it, but really only people who are not serious historians. Maybe this is the thing that goes around a lot on the internet. This is the type of thing that you're liable to hear somebody saying at the coffee shop, but not seriously teaching in a history class. So it's pretty weak on this score too. Okay, any question about our criticism of the legendary hypothesis? This is our argument that the legendary hypothesis does not work, and it's because of the character and quality of the documents. The New Testament documents are not the result of legends. They are the documents that teach the resurrection. But it does not work to say that they're just gradually accumulated myths that are designed to imitate myths that they already knew. Okay? But we're right here at the end of that part, so does anybody want to make a final comment or a question about it? Are you happy with all 5 of these responses to the legendary hypothesis, or are you unhappy with them? What do you want to say about it? You don't have to say anything, but you do get bonus points if you comment. You know about those points, don't you? They're not real, but you get them. Okay, just to conclude, let's read a statement from R.T. France. And I think his description of the historical quality of the New Testament books is very helpful. He says, "At the level of their literary and historical character, we have good reason to treat the Gospels seriously as a source of information on the life and teaching of Jesus, and thus on the historical origins of Christianity. Ancient historians have sometimes commented that the degree of skepticism with which New Testament scholars approach their sources is far greater than would be thought justified in any other branch of ancient history. Indeed, many ancient historians would count themselves fortunate to have 4 such responsible accounts written within a generation or two of the events and preserved in such a wealth of early manuscript evidence. Beyond that point, the decision as to how far a scholar is willing to accept the record they offer, that is, the record the Gospels offer, is likely to be influenced more by his openness to a supernaturalist worldview than by strictly historical considerations. Now, that's a bridge to the next part of our discussion, which is to answer the question, could a miracle ever be the best historical explanation? Now, see, what France says here is that whether you're open to the idea of the Gospels telling the truth about Jesus is going to be determined not by your astuteness and seriousness as a historian, because the Gospels are great historical data for the ancient world. They are as good a source as you can imagine having for some historical events. You got 4 different accounts of these that all agree and are written from different vantage points, but they're solid historical documents. So he says, these are great evidence, but whether you're open to them telling the truth is likely to be determined not by how good of a historian you are, but whether you're willing to believe in God. That's the supernaturalist worldview he mentions. Because if you believe in God, who created the world, and then you have really great historical evidence that God raised Jesus from the dead, you're not going to be surprised by that, and you would be willing to believe it. But what if you've already decided that God doesn't exist, and there are no miracles, and then you come to these great historical documents that all agree and are written by eyewitnesses or people who knew the eyewitnesses, and they say God raised Jesus from the dead? You're going to say, that could not be the explanation. They have to be mistaken, or they have to be conspiring, or they have to have imagined that they saw Jesus, or something must have happened other than that they're just telling the truth. You see what he's saying? That whether you believe in the Gospels hinges not on whether you're doing serious history, but whether you believe in God or are open to God existing. Okay, one more statement. This is Eusebius of Caesarea, who was an ancient historian, and he wrote, "Let us band together to invent all the miracles and resurrection appearances which we never saw, and let us carry the sham even unto death. Why not die for nothing? Why dislike torture and whipping inflicted for no good reason?" You see what he's doing? He's spoofing the people who say that the apostles made up these things that we're talking about in the Gospels. He says, let's just get together and invent all this stuff so that we can die by torture. Let us go out to all nations and overthrow their institutions and denounce their gods. And even if we don't convince anybody, at least, I put it lest, but it should be at least, at least we'll have the satisfaction of drawing down on ourselves the punishment for our own deceit. Now, I think that highlights that the gospel writers were telling the truth, because what they had to gain by that was torture and death and being ridiculed by people in the world, which is what happened to them. So I think these are good statements to remind us that we're dealing with accurate history. Okay, so we've evaluated those naturalistic explanations of the 4 facts, and now we move to the last thing to prove our argument sound, which is to evaluate arguments against the plausibility of establishing a miracle. And some say that a miracle is inherently the least plausible explanation. It doesn't matter what the alternative theories are or how far of a stretch they are, like Jesus having a previously unknown twin brother, or Jesus swooning on the cross and then summoning the strength to push the boulder out of the way, or whatever the theory might be. It doesn't matter how ridiculous it is. It's not as ridiculous as believing in a miracle. So that's the last thing we want to do, is to try to respond to that. So if you have somebody you're dealing with who is just opposed to miracles, and that's how a lot of atheists and agnostics are, or even people who are open to theism, they think maybe there is a God, but I have a hard time believing that Jesus was raised from the dead because I don't find myself wanting to believe in miracles. They might be thinking something like this, that any miraculous explanation is always the weakest. And let's give an example. This is Bart Ehrman, who is now pretty much a celebrity as a biblical historian, even though his education is actually in textual criticism, but he has marketed himself, maybe you would say his publishers have marketed him as a historian, but this is what he says: their probability, that is the probability of miracles, is infinitesimally remote. Historians can only establish what probably happened in the past, and by definition, a miracle is the least probable occurrence. Now notice how he defines it. There's his definition of a miracle, the least probable occurrence. Well, let me ask you a question. If God exists, is a miracle the least probable occurrence? Let's say you're walking around Galilee with Jesus of Nazareth at the time when he was on the earth. Is a miracle the least probable occurrence? No, it well could happen because you're dealing with a supernatural God. But that's how he defines it. So he says historians could never establish that a miracle occurred because a miracle is by definition the least probable occurrence. I wish we could establish miracles, but we can't. It's no one's fault. It's simply that the canons of historical research do not allow for the possibility of establishing as probable the least probable of all occurrences. The principle behind the canons in historical research, or the standards like we've been seeing from McCullough, those 6, remember we gave the 6 criteria of a historical explanation, and he says the principle behind those standards is that people of every persuasion can look at the evidence and draw the same conclusions. Well, he says the only possible good explanation is one that doesn't include a miracle because that's one that everybody can accept. Well, wait a minute. I can't accept it. I don't find that it's plausible to believe in the conspiracy theory or the hallucination theory or the swoon theory or so forth. I find those implausible. I find that they don't satisfy the criteria for the best explanation, but the resurrection does. So this is a very weak way of arguing, because first he says, I'm going to define a miracle in such a way that it's improbable, and then I'm going to say every other explanation is one that we can all agree on. But that's just not the case. So he's prejudicing his readers against believing in miracles from the start. Well, his type of argument goes back to David Hume, who is a Scottish skeptic of Christianity. He was an atheist or an agnostic, depending on. And in this book, he sort of set the modern agenda for how people react to the Bible doctrine about Jesus. If they are skeptical of the Bible, they probably are thinking along the terms that David Hume set in his work. And he gives 2 arguments. The first argument against miracles, he says, against a miracle ever being the best explanation, is what we could call the in principle argument, which is even if there ever was a full proof of a miracle, it would always be offset by everybody's uniform experience. So he says, let's say you had so much historical evidence for a miracle having occurred that you could call it a full proof. In other words, we've got all the evidence we could want. You name some kind of evidence you would like to have for a miracle, and we've got it. So he'll just say, grant that we have all possible evidence for a miracle. That would still be counterbalanced if you think of weights and measures. That even a full proof of a miracle would always be weighted down, on the other hand, by what? Everybody's experience throughout all the ages. And everybody's experience is, for example, dead people stay dead. And so that outweighs the possibility that Jesus was raised from the dead, no matter how much evidence there is for Jesus having been raised from the dead. So that's his argument. But Hume admitted, notice, Hume admitted that he would not believe in a miracle even if every single historian believed that it had occurred. This is how strongly he believed in his argument. So he says, let's say 100% of the historians said Noah's flood happened, or 100% of the historians said Lazarus was resurrected, or Jesus was resurrected, or Jesus walked on the water. He would not believe in it no matter what. Now, his second argument, and we'll talk about both of these, I'm just putting them on the table, but the second argument was what he calls the in fact argument. So there's the in principle argument, which is that even if you had all full proof of a miracle, that would be counterbalanced by everybody's universal experience. It would be outweighed by that, I should say. The second argument is the in fact, which is here's how things actually are in fact. Namely, there's never been a full proof of a miracle. Never been good evidence for a miracle. And here's how he says it. He gives some reasons for thinking that. One is that no miracle in history has been attested by a sufficient number of educated and honest men who would have a great deal to lose by lying. So there's never been a group of people you would accept, whose words you would accept, who told you that a miracle happened. Then he says people crave the miraculous, and they will believe in absurdities. So people are just gullible. And we know that sometimes people are gullible, but that's his second argument, is the people who believe in miracles are being foolish, and they're just accepting things for no good reason. And then his third way of arguing for it is to say that miracles have occurred only among barbarous peoples. And maybe that's just another way of making that second point. Barbarous peoples meaning uneducated, unsophisticated, ignorant people. He says those are the folks who have believed in miracles over the centuries. So I don't know if you find that a little bit insulting, because if you're a Christian, then you believe in miracles, but that's what he said. So we can only say what he said, but those are his three arguments in favor of this in fact argument. So he first says, even if you could get a full proof, that would be outweighed by everybody's universal experience that they don't occur. And then he says, but in fact, there never has been a full proof of a miracle. So he says there's never been sufficient reason for us to believe in a miracle. And then he finally, as a subsequent support of this second argument, he says miracles occur in all religions, and so they cancel each other out. So just pick your favorite world religion, and it's probably got a miracle in there somewhere. And he says, but if one religion teaches against all the other religions, and they both have miracles, then it's impossible to know which of these religions would be correct, because they all claim to have miracles. Okay, so he says all of that is a mess. You could never tell which religion is actually being verified by a miracle because they all claim to have them. Okay, very interesting. Let's give a quote from him to get the context. He says, the Christian religion not only was at first attended with miracles, but even at this day cannot be believed by any reasonable person without one. Now, why does he say that? Why does he say a miracle has to occur for you to believe in Christianity? He says, mere reason is insufficient to convince us of its veracity, and whoever is moved by faith to assent to it is conscious of a continued miracle in his own person, which subverts all the principles of his understanding and gives him a determination to believe what is most contrary to custom and experience. So he's saying, and that's a lot of jargon that we don't normally use, but what's he saying? He's saying, you know a miracle didn't occur, but you believe so strongly, you want to believe that it's like a miracle is happening within you. And it's pretty insulting to say you know it's irrational, but if you believe it, since all of your rational faculties are being pushed to the side, that must mean a miracle is happening in your own mind. So it's very demeaning to people who believe in Christianity. Very demeaning to people who would believe in miracles. Well, what are some problems with it? Now, you may have already thought of problems with it as you were just reading what the arguments are, but he already rules out miracles as possible explanations a priori, or by that we mean before having considered any evidence for them. He just rules them out and says this never could have happened. And he says, notice, did you say it's universal experience? He says the reason you could not ever have a convincing full proof of a miracle is because universal experience is against it. But that's the question. The question is whether humans have ever experienced these miracles. That's what we're trying to decide. So notice how he tries to slip in the conclusion before ever considering the evidence. He just says evidence could never really support a miracle because universal experience says we don't have a miracle. That's the very question. We're trying to ask, did Peter see the risen Lord? You see, we're wondering about that. We're trying to say, did Noah experience a worldwide flood? We're asking that question. So you cannot answer the question with any evidence by just waving your hand and saying, well, nobody ever saw that. So he is starting out with the assumption that his belief is already correct without considering any evidence. Did you notice that little sleight of hand there? So he's ruling it out before he even considers the possibility. Notice how he defines it. A miracle may be accurately defined a transgression of a law of nature by a particular volition or will of the deity, or by some interposition of some invisible agent. A corollary of this is that a miracle is something that is highly improbable because we are not familiar with such violations. A law of nature is, by definition, an exceptionless regularity. So he says, laws of nature could never be broken. That's why they're laws. And a miracle breaks the law of nature. And then he says, but if God exists, he's the deity who set up the laws of nature. Why would he go against himself? Well, this is a problem in how he sets up his definition of a miracle. His definition is it goes against what God set up as the law. So why would God ever do one? And another person who said pretty much the same thing is Spinoza. I'm going to skip over that statement. But I'm going to skip over this for sake of time. I think we should go with a different definition of a miracle, which is this. A miracle is an event which natural causes are incapable of producing. This is not that God violates his own rules, but rather it's just an event that the laws of nature by themselves cannot produce. Laws of nature are a description of regularity, but they do not say whether something absolutely could or could not happen under any circumstances. They say, here's what the laws of nature always seem to produce. But the laws of nature have built into them something like an all things being equal clause. Like, if I drop an apple, it goes down, unless God performs a miracle, unless something happens that would change that, unless something that is unusual happens that the laws of nature are incapable of producing. See, the laws of nature are just descriptions of regularity. So when God performs a miracle, he's not breaking his own law. He's not contradicting himself. So instead of saying a miracle is a violation of the law of nature, I think it would be a lot more helpful if we just say a miracle is an effect that the natural regularities do not produce. And that way we don't invite this criticism that God is contradicting himself because God sets up laws and then he breaks them. See, that's what Hume was complaining about. So let's just describe miracles in this way. Okay, does that make sense? Who has a question or a comment about our response to Hume so far? Do you see his move where he's trying to say from the outset, miracles are impossible because nobody's ever experienced one? And our response should be, well, how do you know? I mean, that's the whole question, is whether anybody's ever experienced one. You say they haven't, but is that really the case? Is that universal experience? And for him to say, oh, well, laws of nature are what they are, so a miracle could not occur. Our response is, well, wait a minute. Laws of nature describe the regularities that we observe, but the laws themselves would have built into them some kind of all things being equal or ceteris paribus clause, where we would say, unless God allows us to see something different. You see what I mean? Okay, question or comment? Is it clear? Okay, so far, is it clear? Good. Well, that's good. Okay, well, what about another problem? Since we have maybe 3 minutes, another problem with Hume's argument is that it proves too much. If an argument proves too much, then it's not good. If it proves things it couldn't prove, then it's no good. There's a problem in there somewhere. Because Hume's argument would rule out known facts. Thomas Sherlock, for example, in his response to Hume, in Hume's own day, said, given Hume's logic, a man living in a hot climate should never believe the testimony of others that water could exist in a solid state. Why should he not believe that? Because for people in his part of the world, their uniform experience is water does not exist in a solid state. Because he's never seen it before. We're talking about people prior to modern methods of refrigeration, of course. But see, he hasn't seen that. But is it the truth that water can exist in a solid state? Well, certainly. Or, he says, we go beyond the evidence of our senses when we conclude that events absolutely cannot happen other than according to the course of nature. So that's the second argument, is Hume's argument proves too much. And we could give other examples like that of things that we don't see happening, nobody's ever seen them happen, but we know that they did happen. Like today, a good example would be the origin of the universe out of nothing. See, that's well accepted by science, is that there was a beginning of the universe. That was one of the things we discussed earlier in our course when we were in the other classroom, is that reputable scientists are pretty well agreed now. There's a very strong scientific consensus that there was an absolute beginning of the universe some finite time ago. They may disagree with us about how long ago that was. We would say it was maybe 6,000 to 10,000 years ago, and they would say it was about 14 billion years ago. So there's a big time difference, but they still agree that it began, that there was an absolute spatio-temporal origin. And they do not know what could have produced it, because there was nothing before that. That is the beginning of spatio-temporal reality at the beginning of the universe. They call it the Big Bang. They say it began to exist. Well, now I'm going to let you go, but think about this. Do we ever observe universes originating out of nothing? We do not observe that. But should we believe the universe exists? Should we believe that it did originate at some point? Well, yes. You'd have to be a total solipsist, somebody who believes you only exist. You would have to just be totally opposed to the evidence of your senses to believe that the universe doesn't exist, that it did not originate. But take Hume's logic. He says, if it doesn't accord with universal experience, you should not believe it. Okay? Our universal experience is universes do not pop into existence. This one did. We know it did because we live in it, but we've never experienced it. So, according to Hume, you should not believe in the universe. Now, see, that's a big problem with his logic. It proves too much. Now, suppose you've got an argument, and the result of the argument you're trying to evaluate is that you should not believe the universe originated. Well, that's probably not a good argument, because we're living in it. Okay, we will continue to evaluate Hume next week, and the result of it will be that the arguments against the possibility of a miracle being the best historical explanation are very weak, extremely weak. You should not follow them. Okay, thank you very much. See you next time.